Three, two, one. Mr. Max Michel, welcome back to the American Warrior Show. How you doing, man?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm fantastic, and I'm better now that I'm talking to you on this podcast. Is this round number three for you on this show? Do you know?
At least, yeah. I mean, we've done it years and years ago before we even did the video stuff. It was more of just over the phone podcast kind of style initially.
That's right. Yeah. So for the viewers and the listeners, the initial American Warrior Show was audio only. And of course, as you may or may not know, in today's day and age, video podcasts are the thing. So you got to set up and put your SIG background. And I'm here in the Live Fire studio, and the video is cool too. And I think we'll run the video on YouTube. So for you YouTubers out there, click like and subscribe and do all that stuff, whatever you're supposed to do if you see this on the YouTube. So Max, so this is round whatever it is. And of course, folks, in the show notes, I'll put links to the previous shows. If you haven't listened to the previous shows with Max, you should, because they're a wealth of information, training related information, his history with his dad, and a bunch of other things that we're not going to go over really in detail in this particular show. So please check out the show notes and click those links and go back in time a little bit. So Max, I'm going to hit it right out the gate. I'm going to kind of set the agenda to an extent and set your fame, if you will. How many national and world titles have you won?
Gosh, I probably should know that answer, dude. Like off the top, I should know exactly what it is, but I want to say 13 USPSA national championships, maybe 7 Steel Challenge national championships, 7 World Steel Challenge, an IPSC World Shoot. So I don't know, and maybe several IPSC national championships as well, in multiple divisions. Whether it be open. Open was kind of how I cut my teeth many years ago. I think now most people don't even think about that, or don't even know maybe that that's kind of how I got started, was with an open gun. And man, those were fun days, dude. Like just running with KC and JJ and Chris Tilley, and those guys in kind of that generation, as we were battling with the Robs and the Todds and the Jerrys of the days. But yeah, so I started in open, and then of course went to carry optics, and in between then played a little bit in limited 10 and limited and production. So it's been a long career for sure.
Yeah, man. And so, for the listener, that's a great point. They see you as the current SIG guy, Max Michel, team captain, or whatever else you do from SIG. And we'll talk about SIG kind of toward the end of the show, dominating in carry optics for many years. Matter of fact, I think the last podcast we did was a after action of the nationals that you had won that year, I believe, where you had won the carry optics division again, and you actually fully zeroed a stage. So the average viewer and listener, that's funny, man, knows you kind of as this carry optics phenom, but you were a beast in open class. Of course, your background is, you grew up shooting with your father, joined the Army, ended up with the Army Marksmanship Unit, where you and I started to interact and met each other for the first time. And you were definitely a purely open shooter. Although, if I remember correctly, and I think we had a conversation in the car the last time we were together about our battle in limited division at the South Carolina State match, right? Do you want to remind the audience who won the limited division in that match?
Yeah, well, I mean, the audience may or may not be surprised to know that Mike Seeklander whipped my ass there. And I'll never forget that. That was just a great time. I just remember battling with you, in the limited division, the few times that we've done it. I remember one time, and I'll kind of toot my own horn here a little bit. I shot against you at it was like you and a couple of other guys in limited at Double Tap. Do you remember the Double Tap Championship?
Yes.
What a great match that used to be. Years ago, we would go there and shoot. And I remember, back then I was an open shooter, and Travis Tomasi was also on the AMU with me. I hired him on in 2002 to be my training partner. And this was it was early 2000s, whenever it was, at the Double Tap. And I remember we went to that match, and I said, "Hey, Trav, how cool would it be if you shot open and I shot limited?" Because nobody really sees us as a threat in those divisions. Now, I knew Travis was awesome with an open gun. That's why I hired him. He was incredible. But then we were going to matches together, and we were competing against one another all the time. and we were getting first and second, or first and third, or whatever it was. So I said, wouldn't it be cool if we just won everything together? So he started shooting limited. Anyway, long story short, we went to this specific match, and our boss at the time was like, "Oh, Michelle, you can't shoot anything without a dot." And, "Oh, Tomasi, you can't shoot anything with a dot. You can't go that
Yeah.
fast," and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So we trained behind the scenes without him knowing exactly what we were doing. So we went to that match, and he won open, I won limited. But I remember, you were there, and I think maybe Phil Strader was also one of the top guys in the early 2000s with an iron sight. And I didn't take anything for granted. It was so fun and so cool because, when I went to that match, it was, what I mean by I didn't take anything for granted is I was aiming at everything,
Mhm.
where I'm not saying that you and Phil and those guys weren't, but you guys were very comfortable with iron sights. You might, every now and again look through the sight here or there, where I took zero for granted. So, I mean, I was shooting so fast, but I was having so many alphas. It was great. But then, yeah, then we, South Carolina, that was, Mike Seeklander time at that time. He kicked my ass there as well. So,
Well,
um,
the real truth is, though, at South Carolina, you just picked up a limited gun as well. And folks, for the record, when a guy jumps on this podcast and says, "I've won whatever national championships you just said," and dominating a world champion, a steel challenge champion shooter. I mean, Max has won at the national and world level significantly more than I have and probably ever will. Except for I do plan on kicking butt in the senior division, which we'll talk about that later on the
yeah,
show.
man.
But Max, for the listener, he literally just picks up a limited gun, and we could talk about the differences as well. There certainly are some differences when you're competing to the top level, but full disclosure, I had to throw that out there because South Carolina State was one of those few matches where I had the match of my life, and to beat you was an amazing thing. Of course, we were training together back then. We talked about our AMU training days when Max used to fly me down, or not fly me down, tell me to show up and hand out some ammo, and that was the beauty of it. And one of the things about that, for the audience that doesn't realize this, you were a top level shooter. You were at the AMU. You had Travis. I think Julie was still there, and some other shooters. But you routinely brought in the best of the best in your mind to train with the team, and as well as these are your competitors. I know Saul Kirsch was there. I think you might have had Angus, and it was all, I think, in the interest of figuring out what other guys were doing and developing relationships and just getting better, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, when I joined the AMU, the action shooting team was very much in its infancy phase. I mean, if you think about, I got there in '99, the team started in '94, but the unit formed in '56. So, I mean, this was many years later when the action shooting team came about. And in '94, it wasn't even really a team. Even when I got there in '99, it wasn't a real team yet. We were part of the service pistol team. Now, the guys that were there before me, some of the names you might remember: Jay Christie,
Yep.
Merle Eddington, and Greg Way, and Sam Conway. I mean, there was probably four guys that you might remember over the years that were part of that team. But again, it never really was a full team. And then when I got there, I mean, we were still part of the service pistol team, and we didn't even have our own range. We were borrowing ranges from people. Um, and myself and Julie were kind of like the only people there initially, through that kind of growing phase. And so it was very important for me, for my development, to bring in guys like you, Angus Hobdell, Saul Kirsch, Travis Tomasi, bring in names that could not just help me get better, but also that I can learn from and look up to, from to being a true professional, and knowing how to train, how to instruct, how to get better, and how to relay the information to others. So I think that was extremely important. And then through that, we ended up building the team even that much more, because once I started winning, we started showing the value of the action shooting team. And then when the war kicked off, that's when our real value kind of came out, was like, yeah, we can win at a high level, but now we're able to give back, because the global war on terrorism is very applicable to what we do as action shooters. So it made total sense to continue to invest more into that team. So that would eventually, what that did for us is then we became legit, so to speak, where we got our own gun range, where we had 8 different shooting bays, or 9 shooting bays, 4 25-yarders, 4 50-yarders, and in a 300-yard range with some kind of pneumatic steel in there, tons of gear, everything that we needed, our own office. I mean, we felt like we were living large, and then we started getting more people there. And then now to the point to where the team has exploded 20 plus years later. But yeah, you were a big part of that. You bringing you guys like you down there was huge for my development and for the team.
Yeah, man, it was an incredible time frame for me as well, and I always there was one point in time where you had tried to recruit me, and I think Jay Christie was still around, if I remember correctly. Potentially, no, that may be incorrect. I'm
Yeah, I
trying to
think it
think.
was it was Major Ante. I think
That's
was
right.
his
Major
name.
Ante tried to recruit me, and actually, to an extent, got me a letter, and then some of the paperwork fell through. I ended up going to the Air Marshals and taking over the firearms program, and ended up on a completely different career path. But I always wonder where Mike Seeklander would be had I been allowed to go to the AMU. Of course, I was a former Marine, so I could jump over to the Army,
Yeah.
with a small amount of training, and then train with Max Michel forever. Who knows? Maybe we'd be on Team SIG together or something like that. So
Yeah, man. Who knows? But as you and I talked about before, I mean, I would love that. I would love to have had you there. I pushed super hard to have you there, and it would have been great for both of us. I mean, look, Travis joined the team and became an IPSC world champion. So had you joined the team, I think the same could have been said for you, and it would have elevated my game. And yeah, I mean, I would love to be SIG teammates with you. I tried to bring you on to SIG
yep.
15 years ago, whatever it was. But so you're always going to be one of my guys that I go to for a lot of different things. But I think, as we talked about before, everything happens for a reason, and the path that you got put on versus the path that I got put on, it led us to do different things, and now we're able to help one another in different ways and elevate each other's games still to this day. So it's pretty unique, pretty awesome.
Agreed. And folks, we haven't really talked about this, but in the last year, of course, Max and I have known each other for 20 years now, but in the last year, we've really reconnected in a training manner, meaning just, instead of just personally connecting here and there and texting and seeing each other at matches, we've actually been training together. And I'm going to get into some of the details of those training sessions a little bit later in the show, but I want to kind of build the excitement here on what I want to do. And last night we talked in the pre-show, said, "Hey," Max asked, "What are the questions? What are we going to go through today?" And I didn't tell you, but here's what I want to do. I want to approach this year, and it's actually quite realistic because this is a world shoot year, and I want to approach the interview like I'm building a training plan with Max Michel. And the goal is 2025 World Shoot with a handgun division. Of course, there are some rifle and PCC divisions which I may have the opportunity to shoot as well. But we're going to train starting right now. It's December 2024. So whenever you're listening to this or watching this, know the time frame, which allows us to position this interview in a very exciting manner where we can say, okay, it's December. What do we do? Push go. How do we approach the training year? And Max, I want to leave no stone unturned. I want to talk about how you may review this year and look at your videos, like how you may say, man, my guns worked really great, or I need to make some modifications on my guns. I need to look at a different optics setup. I shot this ammo. I may tweak my ammo. I'm going to order my targets. I'm going to order, of course, you're sponsored by SIG. We could talk about SIG products, so however much you want to, but how you might approach that. And then jump into the training year. Does it start on January 1st? Does it start a day a week for a while? Does it start with a bunch of dry fire during the colder months? And then as we go into it, how do we start to live fire train? And then, of course, validate the training plan. Like, when do we start hitting matches? What do we learn from those matches? How do we build the mental toughness for World Shoot? Because one of the interesting conversations that we had riding the car the last time we trained together was a story about how you had approached a previous world shoot. And if I remember correctly, you had actually hired someone to help load your magazines and set up things or whatever else. So your focus was entirely shooting. So I want to talk about that volume of shooting as well. And then as we go through this, I'm going to pick into some of the details you give us. So it's going to be a super exciting show. And by the way, you defenders out there that are thinking, well, these guys are competition shooters. They're talking about training for a world shoot. Hey, your world shoot defenders and military guys and law enforcement guys is that huge battle you may get into on the street one day. So I want you to consider taking some of these same principles and applying them to how you train as well. From a logistics standpoint to a dry fire standpoint to a live fire standpoint, to testing and evaluation, which might be your qualification, or maybe you're in a group or a unit that actually gets to go out and actively engage and what you're going to learn from those kind of things. So Max, it's going to be an exciting show, man. And lead it off. Where are we going first?
So there's so much to talk about and digest. I mean, you're right. I did ask you, say, hey, how can I prepare? What can I do for the show? And yeah, so those out there that are listening and watching, I got no preparation for this. So this is going to come all off the top of the head here, but we're going to do it together. And it's a perfect timing because on my Patreon account, my Train with Max Patreon account, this is exactly a video that I'm going to be filming later today to discuss with my guys as well. And there's three things that I want to look at before I even get started on talking about, what the actual plan will be. And the first one, Mike, you hit on it, was self-assess. I want to go through my videos this year, which I'm not happy with. We can dive through that a little bit more. You and I talked a lot about the physical body, whether it's getting older or, I mean, I hate to use that term because I don't believe that. I really truly don't believe that. There's some injuries, that I've had over the past few years, which haven't been great. And it's caused me to not do some of the things that I've wanted to do or that I've always done, some of my strengths, which has been taken away from me, which has been hard to even deal with mentally, to be honest with you. So we can get through that. And I'm going to be completely raw on this show. And that's one of the things that, you and I talked about beforehand too. Like, it's going to be authentic. This show is going to be super authentic. So I want to go through it and then shoot. I mean, if I'm going to go out there and be authentic and be raw, then I'm going to lean on you to get some of these answers as well to help me. But number one is definitely self-assess. And as I mentioned, sometimes that's not fun. Now, some of the guys out there who, are maybe 5 years into their career, they're absolutely passionate. They're obsessed with what they love doing, whether it be military, law enforcement, competitive shooting. So looking back through their videos over that past year might be, motivating, and it might be exciting. And then some of us out there, you might be going back to those videos and being like, man, I can't believe I moved that way, or man, I can't believe I made that mistake. And whatever it is, we're going to self-assess and we're going to look inside ourselves and figure out what we did right. Let's at least, start with that. So let's start with the positive side. What did I do well this year? And it could be not even from a physical standpoint. It could be how you built your schedule and how you built your calendar, or maybe how you were, consistent in whatever your plan was. You didn't, falter one way or the other. You said, you know what, I'm going to get up every morning at 06 and I'm doing X, Y, and Z before work. And then after work, I'm doing this, whatever it was. Like, make sure you have a list, kind of a, what I call a goal bank account. We'll get into that in a moment, but let's create a list of that goal bank account that says, hey, these are the things I did well. Now, the next part of that is, what can I improve upon? Not necessarily what did I suck at, but what can I improve upon? What are my areas of improvement? Because everybody needs that. You need to have an opportunity to see what you did well, and then what you can improve upon. I look more for those things that I can improve upon these days, more so than the things that I did well. That's just how I operate nowadays. I've won everything I've wanted to win more than once, so I'm very, very blessed and very proud of what I've done. But I enjoy the process of continuing to get better. Not necessarily to get another win. I just enjoy the process of, hey, what can I do to be better? What can I do differently? So that's a very important part of it, is a self-assessment. So I would say that's a big part that I'm going to be working through over the next month or so, kind of trying to figure out that part of myself. And part of that is the physical aspect. What can I do differently and better next year, knowing that I have a world shoot in 2025 in September. I'm and it's not even a year away. I mean, we're talking, 9 to 10 months out. So
Right.
what can I do? And so for me personally, and we'll dive deeper into it here in a bit, but yeah, definitely getting back with my personal trainer, whether that be through mobility, agility, strength and conditioning, cardio, and then also the other important parts of what you and I do, the cognitive training and the vision training. Those things matter. If I can read and react something faster than my competitors, if I can call a delta faster than my competitors can, if I can understand that a piece of steel didn't fall before I leave a position, and I can compute that information faster than my competitors can, then I don't necessarily have to be a perfect shooter. I just have to read and react faster than everybody else, which is typically what happens. Nobody's perfect at what they do. So I think that's a big part of it, the self-assessment. The other
Max,
part of it is,
let me dig a little deeper into the self-assessment. So when we're talking about a self-assessment, a couple of questions, a few questions. Number one, do you do a video review? And if there's a way you find that to be the easiest. So for example, what I've done in the past, I don't always do it. I don't do as great a job at reviewing my videos that I should, but I think I'm going to do this. having heard you say that. I'm going to do it again like I used to. What I've done in the past was literally take every stage video somewhat chronologically, tie them all together into one major video, like use a program like iMovie or some sort of an editing program, so I could take all of those stages instead of having to like watch a stage on my phone and put them all together and then spit that out as one big video, so I could literally watch myself stage after stage after stage, and then maybe even slow it down. Is there a manner you do video review? And B, if you don't mind, since we're getting raw, what are the three things in the last year that you did great? What are the three things in the last year that you go, that was crap?
Yeah. So I think as far as like the video part of it, any editing service that you can get, and it could be just your phone. It could be just as simple as a phone or an iPad. And when you're videoing throughout the year, it's important to know that you're going to go back and review this footage. Like I'm not just videoing for Instagram, right? So I'm videoing, yeah, because I have to do that. That's part of the job. But I want to get full body. So guys out there that are filming, make sure you're getting full body of everything you're doing. So have a buddy that you can trust, and make sure you do a good job for him or her as well. Say, hey, look, I'm going to video for you today. You video for me. So make sure there's like 5 shooters in between us. So that way we can both focus on what we have to do and so on and so forth. So it's important to have a full body point of view. You can use hat cam stuff, but I really feel that where the learning comes from is that kind of third person, and really getting a full view. So that's going to be the first important thing. And then what I mean by using your phone or an iPad or any sort of editing service that you can scrub, I want to be able to go in slow motion, but I
Mm.
also want to be able to scrub back and forth. So iPads are really easy to do that with because you can watch it on iMovie or on just or standard on your iPhone or whatever it is, and you can scrub back and forth. So I can see when I'm coming into a position how I'm breaking down or how early the gun is coming up into a position. That's very helpful to do. So anything that where you can scrub back and forth, and of course add slow motion, you can do that. But I just like having control of the scrubbing back and forth because it really I can see things a little bit differently, and it's just important, as I mentioned, to get the proper camera angle. Um, if guys are not really caring and they're just kind of throwing up the phone to get a cool video for Instagram, then that's what you'll get. You'll get a cool video for Instagram, but you're not going to get any feedback later on in the year. So that's the first thing I would consider. And then as
Let
far,
me before you give your, I want to mirror that because that was a point I've been wanting to say on social media. So we'll say it here on the podcast for years now, Max, is if you're hearing my voice and you take those first person hat cam videos or glasses videos, I love you. If you're doing it to make, if you're doing it for fun and to post some action looking things for some people, but they are in most aspects, an absolute utter waste of your video space. I couldn't agree more. Also, if you got a follow along person that's following over your shoulder to make it look dramatic and action oriented, kudos to you. Kudos to you if you have a million followers on Instagram. But if you really care about video review, just think about like professional sports. When they do video review, they don't do it from a camera that's attached to the guy's helmet. They do it as an overall review for a specific reason. So, Max, I want to say, dude, that's one of my biggest pet peeves. People will send me videos to review, members, and they'll say, like, hey, can you review this video? And all I see is the gun going off. I might be able to see if the gun is up in an entry or up maybe as they're moving out or whatever. But otherwise, folks, I hate to say it, they're pretty on Instagram, but they're an utter waste of your time. You can get dual video, get the hat cam, but whole body, key point, folks. If you're listening right now or watching, write that down. Change the way you video if you actually care about improving. So sorry to interrupt, but that's a great point.
no, appreciate it. Yeah. So and then the three things I think I did well this year. And again, I'm still diving through all this myself. I'm not completed with my own self assessment. Um, but I think three things that I did well was number one is I did stick to my plan, whatever I set out to do. You and I talked a long time ago, earlier in the year, about what my year would look like, and it was hard for me to do the things that I did, but I did stick to my plan in that. I kind of focused heavily earlier in the year as much as I could anyway in competing. And then once kind of midway through the year after nationals, I maybe shot another match or two, but the main focus after that switched to being more on the business side and learning the business side and trying to do better for my sponsors and whatnot. So I did stick to my plan. And if I said I was going to go out and train on this day, I went out and trained on that day. If I said I was going to this match, I went to that match. So I do feel that, and in that regard, I was a true professional in that I set out to a plan and I attacked the plan the way that I wanted to. Whether the plan was the right plan or worked, that's to be determined through my self assessment. But I did do that. I think that was one of the things I did well. Um, Another thing I think I did well was I leaned on others, and that's leaning on you. That's one of the guys that I leaned on. So knowing that I can't do it all myself anymore. I just back in the day when I was first starting, I looked at guys like you and Travis and Saul and Angus and all these guys that I brought into the AMU, and then you get to a certain point to where I wouldn't say you get cocky, but you get comfortable. You get to a certain point, you're like, well, man, I'm doing all this on my own. I don't want anybody else to come and train with me. I want to do it on my own. And I think that was good for a certain period of time, but now I'm at a point in my career where it's time to start leaning back on others and guys like you who are super successful and myself who are successful together. We can collaborate instead of competing with one another for podcast time or for championships, whatever it is. We help one another grow and collaborate, and it makes us both much more valuable for our own development, but also for our sponsors and the community of those that we serve and the people that we train. So I think that's a really good positive thing. And then I think that another thing that I did well was I kept up with my gear. Sorry, I kept up with my gear. And I created new gear. So what I mean by that is I was looking at, hey, what can I do to make this optic better? What can I do to make this gun better? What can I do to make this ammo better? And I didn't do that just for myself. I did that for the gun community. And so I think that's part of what I'm going to be talking with my guys on Train with Max with later on this month is that some of the things that we do for self assessment and for getting better. One of the things is kind of a gear overhaul, and for me, I'm able to do a gear overhaul. And instead of like seeking out new gear, I just try to create the best gear that I can because I work for an amazing company that allows me to do that. So I think that's the three things that I did well this year. And we can dive into those more. But the one that I'm really happy most with is leaning on others, being able to train with you and talk with you and just be, like we're talking about on this podcast here, just be raw. Just say, hey, look, I'm not perfect. From the outside looking in, sometimes guys see, hey, this dude went undefeated for 6 seasons and he won all these matches and he won a couple of overall championships, even this year with a carry optic gun against PCC guns and open guns at some of these major matches. So some people see the success and they feel like, oh, it's easy for them, but it's really not. I mean, the more you do it, it's very important to make sure you have a mentor and you lean on other people to help. So that's probably the biggest thing that I'm proud of this year that I did.
Yeah, and I can reflect and think back to when you and I were training this past year. This year, I guess it was this year. And in full disclosure, it was different than times in the past where I would come into the AMU, we would shoot huge amounts of ammo, we would do run after run. I always kind of felt like I was sinking, but I don't really remember any key learning points. Like I was trying to shoot with you and hang with you and Travis. I was trying to impress the AMU coach that I met there, but just don't remember any in-depth learning experiences or discussions. But I can tell you, folks, this last time we got together, when Max and I shot and practiced, we shot together for about 2 or 3 days, and at his location. Then he came up and trained for a couple of days at my location. I know for a fact we're going to repeat that this coming year, but the tidbits and the things and the lessons learned and the discussion points were incredibly deep, and not like advanced where it's like, hey, super secret advanced stuff, but it just incredibly deep in the way we solved shooting related problems and the value of that. So leaning on others, it was fantastic. And folks, we discuss, and we could talk about them things in this podcast a little bit, from physical fitness to mental. We did, and we started out with some training drills where Max showed me some of his foundational beginning drills, and I'm gonna hold that thought for just a minute, because when we get into the actual training plan, I want you to expand on how you do what you do there, because there was a very professional deliberateness to how you start your first drills and how you ingrain the skill through the repetition and the learning experience. But yeah, man, I think that leaning on others and training with others is something I've overlooked. I wish, having done this with you this year, I wish 10 years ago we would have started doing that. Right? We knew each other. We could have done it. We were just, you were busy, I was busy, or whatever else. So, okay, excellent. So that was three great things. What about three things that,
Yeah. So three things that I really want to improve upon that seem to keep haunting me throughout the year. Number one was movement. Um, and I can get into some of the physical side of things, but injuries have kind of really held me back to where it just has, whether it be my knees or my back and things that have happened over the years. And I've taken really good care of my body over these years. That's not in question, but it's just one of those things that I've had to change how I moved a little bit, and I'm still trying to do the things that I've done before, but just in a different way. So I would say number one, I want to work on my movement, and it's not necessarily my one step movement, what I call a step slide or what I call a short burst. Typically within 2 to 3 steps, I still feel relatively strong and really well. But it's when I have to turn my body and run to another position and then flip my hips back and enter that position with balance and stability, get the gun up on time and start shooting as soon as possible. That's an area of improvement that I need to look at and say, okay, if the body is doing this now, how do I change that? And that's going to be, again, where I lean on somebody else. I don't have those answers. I'm not a movement coach. That's not what I do. Um, I have a good idea and a good understanding of what I need to do on my sport and how I can relay that to other people in civilian marksmanship or military law enforcement, competitive shooting, whatever it is. But I'm specifically not a movement coach. And I've worked with a lot of movement coaches in the past, Olympic movement coaches that have worked with some of the greatest Olympic athletes from skiing to running to whatever. And that was very helpful. So I may go back to that well again. I have great movement coaches here locally for me, a few different folks that I've worked with over the years. I'll definitely lean on those folks again to help me, because now that I'm, 40 plus and the body is different than when it was 20 plus, there just might be a different way that I attack it this year. So again, I'm leaning on those guys. So that's going to be the number one thing for me is movement. The second thing that I think I can do well or improve upon that kind of kept popping up this year was activating targets, and specifically swinging targets. And you've trained with me at my place. I have an awesome swinger set up in my place full time.
yeah.
And I typically use that every Friday. Every Friday I'll set up some small courses and I get involved with the swinger target. So it's not that I don't train it. I train it probably more than most people do. But I think what has happened over this past couple years even is I've tried to have the fastest swinger on the planet. And because I think in my head, if I train harder, it'll be easier at the match.
Hmm.
The problem is my swinger is sometimes so fast that when I go to the matches, I'm now expecting the cadence of the swinger or the presentation of the swinger to be a certain way, and it's not. So what I can improve upon on the swinger, it's really been kicking my ass, is not necessarily shot placement on the swinger. It's just that I'm shooting well before the swinger even presents, because I'm expecting this, but it's not there. So as
Mm.
I press the trigger, I bang, the gun's in the air, and then I see the swinger. I'm like, damn, there's the swinger. I need to shoot it, but the gun's in recoil. I can't shoot it at that point. So what had happened to me several times at matches this year and toward the end of last year, I noticed it was I was adding additional shots per swinger, not because of bad shot placement, but just because of almost like I thought I needed to be shooting off of a certain particular timing. So I've already started thinking about how I can correct that, slow down, not necessarily slow down my swinger to where it's easy, but make my swinger presentation more realistic
Mm.
and find ways to attack that a little bit differently in training. Because I've heard other guys, like for Steel Challenge, for instance, oh, I use 8-inch plates instead of the 12-inch plates because if it's harder in training, then it's easier at the match. Well, Steel Challenge is all about speed and muscle memory and transitions. And if you're using an 8-inch plate in training, you think you're working better and harder, but when you get to the match, you're shooting way too slow and you're way off the pace because of what you could have trained a certain way differently. So yeah, I think that's a big thing that I want to improve upon. And then lastly is my points. I've always kind of been one of the better, more accurate shooters, especially in the open division way back when. And my thought process has always been to shoot 90 to 95% of the available points and to shoot 90 to 95% of my ability at all times. And if I do those two things, I mostly win. And or I have a really good chance of winning. And that's still probably true to this day if I do those things. but I think I need to push the envelope a little bit more on the points. I'm noticing as carry optics gets more, prevalent, and there's more shooters doing it, and there's a lot of really good shooters doing it, the guys are getting 95%, 93 to 97%. That's kind of where the zone is, almost like it was back in the day for open. And every Charlie hurts a little bit more. Every Delta hurts a little bit more. So maybe when 92% was enough to win a nationals, I mean, I would say you probably need to be in that 95% range. So just trying to be more dialed in on my points, working on my swingers and working on my movements. That's going to be the focus leading up to World Shoot.
Man, that's some good stuff, and I'm gonna dive into a few of these things now. First of all, for the viewer and listener, you need to understand that when you start to logic through it, like I have, I'm 53. Max is about 10 years younger, if I remember correctly. When you start to logic through it, you can say, well, as you're getting older, to try to beat someone that's younger and should be a little bit faster on their feet, I just need to outshoot them. The problem is with the current ability level out there in the shooting sports, and by the way, it continues to evolve. It continues to get better. These champion shooters, these younger champion shooters, like Max is a younger champion shooter compared to me, and then of course he has younger shooters right now, that might be 28 or 29 in literally the prime of their life. The problem is they are shooting at a level now where they're shooting as good as us. They may make more mistakes in theory if they are nervous and haven't figured out how to master the mental game, but most of those guys have done that as well. So when you, I hate to say it, when you logic through it, and some of you that are getting up there in age and listen to podcasts and you're competitive shooters, when you logic through it, if Max can shoot as good as me and he can outmove me by just a little bit, then it's inarguable. I can't beat that guy. The only way I can, in theory, beat that guy is hope he makes a mistake. But if he's got good mental management, but then again, when you start to go through that whole circle and that whole loop, you come back to the beginning of it's really just about me, anyways. Because in theory, I can't control what he's doing. I can only control what I'm doing. And in theory, if Max Michel can outshoot Mike Seeklander and he's 10 years younger, he should be able to outmove me. Well, then I can't beat him unless he makes a mistake. And him making a mistake is on him, and me not making a mistake is on me. But it's interesting you bring that up. The second thing, and it's kind of a sub point to what you just said, is, I wrote a question down here in my notebook. Has the level changed? Because you talk about going to mobility coaches, working with Olympic level guys. I know in the past you've had a trainer. You do some reaction training, meaning visual processing, thinking, reaction training. We could talk about the little wobbly ball here in a bit in the show, but you've always actually utilized a high level of professionalism in terms of your training. I think maybe more so than most top shooters out there, except for maybe the elite level sponsored shooters like the AMU guys or whatever else. And we're exploring those things, hypnosis and psychology and all these things that are necessary. So I guess my sub question and point is for you, Max, is has the level changed? And in my opinion, it's changed to the point where if you're not doing everything possible to make your like a true professional athlete would, you don't have a chance to win at the national or world level.
Yeah, I think if you're not doing everything you possibly can, number one, it's a slap in the face to yourself and everyone else who supports you and appreciates what you do. But I also think you make it a lot easier to get beat,
Mm.
and that's something that always has worried me over the years. Am I doing enough? Can I do more? That's kind of always been my mindset and my mentality, especially because I am blessed to be able to do what I do for a living. Again, I feel like it's a slap in the face to all those that support me, that send me monthly checks to do what I love. If I'm not doing every single thing and being a true professional, then, I'm never going to reach my full potential. And I'm probably not going to have a job very long either, because somebody else out there is going to appreciate it more and want it more. So I think that's the biggest thing is for me is always being as prepared as possible. And like you said, I've definitely 100% always treated myself as an athlete. And for us in action shooting, we don't really think about ourselves that way. Many of us, if you go to the nationals, if you go to the Carry Optics Nationals, where there's 600 shooters that take it very seriously, and just ask them. I mean, I shoot in the super squad every year, and there's no knock on anybody in the super squad, but not even everybody in the super squad looks at themselves as an athlete, and they're the very best in the hardest division in our sport. Some of those guys do, obviously, but other guys, they do this for fun, and they just happen to be really good at it. So I think that's what separates the good guys from the great guys in any discipline, is treating yourself as a professional and holding yourself to a certain standard, and then upholding that standard, doing it on a daily basis, being consistent. It's fun to go out there and win matches, and it's fun to go out and compete. But sometimes it's not fun to go through the process. And it's those guys who are obsessed, like a Kobe Bryant kind of Mamba mentality, those guys who are obsessed with what they do and what they love. Those are the guys that are going to excel. And more importantly, they're not just going to excel for a couple years. They're going to be the name that you remember for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And when you talk about the history of action shooting, you'll always talk about those names. There's a reason, you and I, Mike, we've been doing this for a long time, dude, but there's a reason when we talk about the history of the sport, whether it be, oh man, do you remember this guy shooting that or this guy shooting this? There's always like 3 or 4 names that you always come back to, and it's because those are the guys that were more elite and carried themselves in a way to true professionalism. And there might have been 5 or 10 other guys that won nationals during that time period, or won a world shoot during that time period. And you might remember them if somebody brings it up. Hey, do you remember? And I don't want to disrespect any of the folks here, but if you say, hey, do you remember this guy? If I threw a name at you right now, you'd be like, oh yeah, I remember that dude, but it's not the guy that you think about every single time.
Yeah. No, you're right. And the ones you do, they didn't just win because they had some sort of natural ability, although they were gifted with a lot of natural things. They did it because they were true professionals. They left nothing unturned. I've had hours and hours and hours of discussion with our older buddy Rob Latham, and he has a little level of dedication where he'll tell you. He said, Mike, he'll tell me, Mike, I gave up everything for shooting. I was not the greatest dad. I missed all of my children's graduation. And wasn't there for many birthdays. He'll say I was very self-centered. I wanted to win more than anything. That's all he wanted to do. And I'm not saying certainly I think he's a husband, father. He's got a great relationship with his kids at this point in time. If you don't know Rob Latham well, but these are the things he tells me. And I'll give you another side example, and I'm going to expand on something else you said, Max. Is there was one point in time, this was in the last several years, and I was telling Rob, I said, man, as far as my my grip strength or whatever, I made, we're driving, I'm like, dude, I can train as much as I want. I have as much ammo and really as much time as I want, as long as I'm not on the road teaching. I said, but man, I found out that if I get up and if I do some sort of a fitness workout in the morning, or and then I maybe go train jiu-jitsu in the afternoon, or maybe I did that the day before, and then I go to the range. I said, there's a limited amount of time I can spend on the range gripping the gun and explosively moving the gun. I said, I have a limited amount of recovery at my age, since I turned 50 and above. And I said, I get to spend so much time on all these other things. And my point was, it's hard to recover from shooting. Like if you said, Mike, let's go shoot 1,000 rounds a day, 10,000 rounds a day, whatever, for 7 days in a row, we would both say our bodies really can't hold up to that. But what he replied to me was so unique. He said, all that time, he said, for me, all that time that you did fitness and jujitsu and all the other things, I just spent shooting. So I was like, yeah. If everything is a priority, nothing is. And if you're listening to me right now and you want to be a world champion shooter, fighter, or whatever else, if everything is a priority, nothing is. And I would tell you, whatever your thing is, as you listen or watch this show, get rid of everything else. I hate to say it, that's going to suck. And you may say, well, I don't want to get rid of jiu-jitsu. I don't want to get rid of my knife fighting. I don't want to stop powerlifting. Guess what? If you want to be elite, give everything else up except for the things that help you facilitate your goal. And I'm not saying not to do physical fitness, but it needs to be directly relative to your goal. If it's not directly relative, you will not be the best. I would submit that to you. And
Yeah.
one more thing. Max said something that the audience I think you caught, but you may not catch this if you haven't trained his level of skill. And it is that he's had some issues on the swingers, and so my point is, a guy shooting still challenged with smaller plates. Maybe that's a great idea. Maybe a faster swinger is a great idea in some aspects, but shooting at the elite level is automated execution of the shots, and the timing is so critically important. The automated execution of the shots for Max and I is thoughtless at speed. We may be monitoring what's going on, but it's largely thoughtless unless we do something that is very slow. If you gave us a slow accuracy related goal, we could think through the process. But all action shooting, and I would submit probably most defensive or gunfighting, is automated processing at speed, because we can't shoot the speeds we shoot and think through anything. There's no time for conscious thought. So it's a revelation that you brought up your swinger speed. That's like, oh, I shot on your swinger. It sucks really bad. It's really fast, but it might be so fast that it didn't present the same challenges or the timing that we need in matches. Just like training on a smaller plate changes the timing of the stage itself. So the lesson there, folks, is from Max. If you didn't hear it, keep things as close to your end outcome as you want to. There are some areas in training where overloading a skill is probably smart, but there are a lot of aspects where that may have an opposing effect or a counter effect to what you're trying to do. So, excellent points, man. What's our next step?
So we talked about kind of what I did well and what I did wrong in that self-assessment phase and all those things. But I think now it's time to, how do we look forward once you figure out what it is you want to do, and I think building my plan moving forward, if you want to get there and start talking about that now, um, specific to the IPSC World Shoot, since that's what we have. I'm going to look back on my past experiences. Number one is I'm starting to build my goals and plans and things like that. I'm going to look at, not only what I did well, what I can improve upon, but what worked for me in the past. And I know in 2014, which sounds like a long time ago, but in 2014, when I won that world shoot, everything changed. As you said, excuse me, as you mentioned earlier, what Robbie said, you have to miss a lot of things. And I have, I'm not proud to say that I did miss the birth of my child, and I have missed birthdays and funerals and weddings, and I missed a lot. I sacrificed a lot, and my family sacrifices a lot. So in 2014, I didn't take anything for granted. I didn't know that Sig Sauer would be the company that it is today. I didn't know that they would bring me back on board after 5 years of being with the company. Who knew what it was going to be? That was before the 320 and everything kind of took off for us. So I just put all my eggs in 2014. And what worked well for me that year is potentially what I'm going to be looking at doing again this year. And that was, again, leaning on other people, getting a nutritionist, working with a physical fitness trainer,
Hmm.
getting with a movement coach, going to other locations to train that I wasn't necessarily comfortable with, but it was better for me, for my development, to get me out of my comfort zone and to train not necessarily with people, but on different locations where I can have other people set up courses of fire and set up drills, hire people to load my mags, and just to be there, be present if I need anything, have multiple guns on hand, have a gunsmith around if something was to happen. So I'm going to look back on kind of the past experiences, because then if you go into 2017, that, because we do a world shoot every 3 years or so. In 2017, we were in France, and mentally I wasn't, between us and everybody listening here, mentally I wasn't dialed in for that match. I had missed so much in 2014 and everything else in between and beyond that and before that, that in 2017 my son had a really cool, unique opportunity to be playing a football game, which sounds silly, but to me it meant a lot to be playing a football game in the New Orleans Superdome. And I was missing that, and I was mad. I was one of the coaches. I was pissed off that I couldn't be there with him, and I was in France, and I was in this little hotel by myself, and I was feeling sorry for myself. But I still had an opportunity to win that match. But because I wasn't dialed in 100% and committed 100% to that, I found a way to lose at the end.
Hmm.
And then in 2020, I was prepared. I was ready. I was hungry again. I was going to go out and win a new division and carry optics, and it was going to be fun, and I was going to do my thing. And of course, COVID hit, and then injuries hit after that, and it was a freaking nightmare. And going into Thailand for the next world shoot, I just physically I couldn't do it. I was in so much pain. I still finished third, which was great. I finished got a gold medal for the team, finished on the podium, but it just wasn't what I wanted and needed. So
And Max, on that pain, you don't have to give a lot of details, but you had a pretty catastrophic back injury. I want people to hear this because I think it's important that you were in so much pain with your back that you pretty much couldn't move to train. You really couldn't move, like literally days before the match, and then you go to the world shoot and end up third. So I want people to appreciate that might be almost as incredible as result as your win. Of course, people just remember, hey, who won, but
right,
podium finish at the world shoot is unbelievable, and more unbelievable with the level of pain you were in that match,
yeah, no, I
which I
appreciate
didn't
it.
know. I didn't know of, honestly.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. A couple things I remember specifically from that match was one stage in particular. It was a lot of movement, and of course, like I said, I was in so much pain. I actually brought a guy with me just to carry my bags, carry all my ammo, get me to the hotel room every night. He would bring me food, and just basically prepare all my gear for the next day. I never left the room. I would ice down my back in the evenings, and he would just take care of everything for me. Um, but I remember during the match, there was this one stage in particular, and man, I crushed it. It was a lot of movement, and just a lot of back and forth, turning of the hips, and you get all the way to the end of the stage, and there was a moving target that was sliding, but while it was sliding, it was also swinging, and it had a no shoot that was way up high. So essentially, it was a headshot, and
Mm,
it was hard. And it's after all this movement, that you get to the end, and that target was kind of coming down, and man, I just nailed it perfectly. Two alphas, two shots, two alphas, no pickups, just bop bop. And I was like, man, I felt really good about that performance. And going back to when I got back to my bag after the adrenaline had kind of finished, and everybody was super happy for me. Man, I just closed my eyes for a second, and I literally started having tears because all the pain started rushing back after that moment. And that's just what I was going through, going walking from stage to stage. I would have a lot of these ups and downs. And then, when the guy who put the medal on my neck, the bronze medal on my neck, he says, "Hey, this isn't where you're supposed to be. I don't usually see you in this spot, or I don't like seeing you." He said something to that effect, like, "This isn't you." And I just thought in my head, man, if you knew what I went through to get to this spot, I think you would think differently. But him and nobody else needed to know what I was going through at that moment. I was just working hard to get the best result that I could for the U.S. and for my family. So yeah, that was tough. And not to go too far off onto a tangent, but even traveling to that match, traveling 20 plus hours, days, like you said, days before, I didn't think I was going to be there, but I knew the US was relying on me to be there also. It wasn't just about me. It was about, yeah, my sponsors and my family, but also the country. Like they were relying on me to put up a score that could help the US win a championship. And maybe that doesn't mean anything to anybody else, but it means a lot to me. And being a serviceman, and kind of being serving my country the way that I have, and the way that I continue to serve through training and giving back to law enforcement and military when I'm called upon, I take it seriously, and I treat it like, hey, these guys are relying upon me. That's my team. They need me. Not just from a physical aspect, but from a mental aspect, because I've shot 9 or 10 world shoots to this point. That's almost 30 years of shooting world shoots. So that experience can help my team. But I had a really bad setback, like you mentioned, just a few weeks before. This was probably like maybe 5 or 6 weeks before the world shoot. I had already injured my back, and I was working hard towards getting it back on track. Not necessarily training for the match, just working on my body. And then I had a really bad setback, and that setback caused me to not be able to do anything. I tried to train. I tried to shoot. I would put a 55-gallon drum, those big barrels that we see on the stages.
mhm.
I put one of those in front of me so I can shoot a few shots, and then I'd have to collapse onto the barrel because I couldn't hold my back. I just couldn't do it. It was so painful. And it was just a problem for me, but I did everything I could. I was going to multiple different doctors, and I was going to the chiropractor several times throughout the week, physical therapy, even got injections, which didn't help. It didn't. I mean, it felt great for 2 days. I was like, man, I'm freaking ready, and it felt so good that I went and helped my in-laws paint their house, and maybe that was the problem that screwed
Yeah.
me up. I felt so good. I was like, oh man, I can do all these things, and then yeah. But long story short, we all get presented with challenges, and again, feeling like a true professional, how I can carry myself, not just building a training plan to make me a better shooter. I needed to build a plan to get me there. I felt like if I could be there and be present, then I would have an opportunity to win. If I didn't go, I had no chance to win. I was just going to be like, oh, Max didn't show up. Like, what the heck? We needed him for the team. So I wanted to do everything I could to be there. And over the years, I've given up so much and sacrificed so much, and shooting has always been the main thing. People ask me, hey, what else? What's your hobby? What do you do? Like, this is what I do, man. This is what I do. This and my family. That's all I got. That's all I care about. And it's been successful to this point. But one of the things kind of you touched on, and that I want to go back to really quickly, is that the more that you want, the more that you say, the next level, you have to give something else up. It's like, I want to get to that level. How do I get there? First thing, what are you going to give up? Because you need more time.
Mm.
Then you want to get to the next level. How do you get there? Then the next level. Then you get to the status of winning at a high level on a consistent basis for multiple years. Think of an Eric Raffel. What does that guy have to give up? He's not just super talented. He also works extremely hard, and he gives up, and he's willing to sacrifice an awful lot to be known as the very best to ever do it.
Mm. That's a fantastic point. In my mind, the analogy is I'm holding my hands in front of the video camera is like, what do you want in this hand? And then what are you willing to give up and dump in this hand, right? So
Yeah.
that's amazing, man. So, and I'm glad we got into this because we've never actually discussed that in the previous podcasts, and they were 6-7 years ago or whatever they were. I don't think people had any idea what you went through in that aspect. Even I myself, and we've been close for many years, didn't know what you went through. So okay, so back to the training plan.
Yeah.
When we talk about training plan, folks, it's important if you're listening to this that your specific training plan might be different as far as the technical things you're working on than Max Michel. There's some things that Max and I probably wouldn't learn or wouldn't work on, but there are a bunch of things at the fundamental level we constantly focus on. So from the training plan, and I'll give you some directions you could take this, Max. Of course, I know we're going to talk about potentially, the volume of dry fire and the volume of live fire, but more importantly, I want to know what the purpose of those things are and how you approach that. Also, I believe JJ and I talked briefly about it, and I found that he does a similar thing that I do. I think you do the same thing. Is he tends to look at his training in different phases, and you got to do this ahead of time. So, for example, if the next 6 weeks is a certain phase, and I'll give you my example, maybe that is just fundamental skill development where I'm just pushing and learning what I can do. And let me rewind. After the gear setup and everything's perfect, guns as perfect as possible. Of course, it'll constantly change. Holster setup, optics setup, gun setup, ammo's loaded. So now I'm going to go try to find skill in that time frame, whatever that is. And then the next phase might be, pushing that skill. Like, how far can I possibly push it? And maybe toward the tail end of that, right before the major match. And I don't know what the time frame was. I'm just throwing ideas for you to discuss. 6 to 7 weeks before the world shoot, for example, then I might be refining my ability to perform those skills over and over and over again, right? And of course, during that historical training session or set of sessions, we're going to matches, and those matches teach us something. And we say, oh, wow, I messed up this thing. What do I need to fix on this thing or this area, this skill? Man, I was weak on this thing that I didn't realize I was weak on. So there's some ideas on how you may approach, some of the questions I know I had, but take it wherever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll kind of hit it from the 1,000-foot overview first, and then kind of we can dive into it. But the first thing I want to do is I'm going to train, and I'm going to develop a training plan specific to IPSC shooting, which is essentially the same thing as USPSA, but it's a little different at the same time. The targets are different. The targets are 30% smaller. There's no head, shoulders, or hips essentially on those targets, so they're smaller. The A zone is shaped completely differently. So the next training session, which is tomorrow for me, will be used on IPSC targets, and that'll be that way moving forward for the remainder of the year. Um, and to get started on that, I'm going to dot, and we can dig in deeper to this as well, but I'll actually outline a specific spot in the A zone that I want to be aiming within because it's so different. I want to maximize the ability to hit the A zone. So I don't want to aim in the middle because the higher you get on that A zone, it starts getting more narrower at the top,
Mm,
which can easily get you Charlies on one side or the other. So there's kind of a big fat portion of that A zone is almost like a 6-inch area that I'll be focusing on. Because again, one of the things that I want to do better this year is points. So I'm going to highlight that in my training session. So I'm going to find ways to train specifically for IPSC shooting. Also, some of the differences in IPSC shooting is the biggest thing I would say is the hit factors, the points per second are lower, which
mm,
means more points are more valuable. So that will help in that regard. You might run 3 or 4 different shooting positions and spend 15 seconds shooting 12 rounds. And that's very doable. That's very possible. You're going to shoot a 3 hit factor stage, and that you're going to find that from time to time. Um, Also, in developing that training plan is not just from the shooting side of it, but also on the physical side of it. I kind of touched on earlier, getting back with my trainer, nutritionist, and trying to find ways to be better with agility, mobility, strength, and cardio. And then the cognitive side of training, as well as the vision, speed, seeing. In other words, visualizing, processing, and reacting information sooner, faster, being able to do those things at a higher level. Um, so that's part of the training plan is just kind of being a specific IPSC shooter, if you will. And then I want to build a calendar. But before I even get to the calendar, I want to lean on other people again. So kind of breaking this down to 3 phases. One, training as an IPSC shooter. What does that look like? The training will be a little bit differently. I'm gonna have to train with you, guys like you. What I would love to do is every 2 months at a minimum, be with somebody. If that could be Mike Seeklander every 2 months, I would love that. But if it ends up being me and you just for 3 or 4 sessions, and then I have JJ for a couple sessions, Travis for a session, maybe Shane Coley, maybe KC, guys that I trust that I've trained with in the past, and guys that I trust that have my best interest in mind.
mm-hmm.
And it's okay if you want to beat me. That's fine. But I want you to have my best interest in mind as well. To where is if you don't win, you want me to win, kind of a thing, right? So I want us to be able to help one another in that way. So that will be extremely helpful. So building my calendar around other people's schedule, which is different. I haven't done that before. I want to, be open-minded and train with people. If I'm going to be going to a match or an event, hey, do you want to stay an extra couple days or go a couple days early? Again, that takes a sacrifice in other areas of our lives that we have to ask other people, hey, are you comfortable with me doing this because the kids have this going on? How is that going to affect the family life? So there's a lot to think about there. And then also build that match calendar that's going to keep me focused on the next thing. It's going to give me uh, it's going to give me a purpose. It's going to give me something to look forward to, something to train for, and keep me sharp. That's one of the things I learned from you, because I asked you, I said, hey, why do you still compete? Why do you still do these things? And you tell me, hey, this keeps me sharp. It keeps me mentally focused. It gives me something to work towards. So I'm at my best at that match, but I'm also at my best throughout the year to help other people in my training events and whatever it might be. So building that calendar, not just with other people to train with, but also a match calendar that's going to keep me like, oh man, I have area 1 in 6 weeks, or I have, this state match in 4 weeks. So then you got to get off your butt and train for those few weeks, whatever it is, because you don't want to do bad. You don't want to go there and perform badly. And then the other part of it, the last part of that calendar building is budgeting my time and my money, because I want to do some international stuff as well. I think it's important. We're going to do the IPSC Nationals, which will be here in August,
Mm-hmm.
leading up to the World Shoot, which is great. That's awesome. But still, it's a U.S. match. The people are speaking English. The hotels. The food. You're comfortable. So I need to find a way to get out of the country a couple of times as well before the World Shoot.
Man, those are great points, and I know the IPSC targets are important. But if you're listening right now, if you look at USPSA and IDPA targets, they're both a silhouette shaped target. The IDPA target has a 0, 1, and 3 zone. The USPSA has a square A, C, and D zone. Previously had a B zone, which was the head, it's a silhouette shaped target, which has a completely different size A zone than what we might call a turtle target, which is a classic, I guess that's a classic IPSC target, right? The turtle shape
Yep.
in the A zone is different. So let me dive into that a little bit more. So if you're working on that target zone, one of the things that I have my students do sometimes is put a mark on the target. They may even do a dashed outline on the A zone, and then put a small square or mark in the direct center of the biggest area of the scoring zone. And it is a crutch, but I only let them do it for a short period of time to learn where at 15 yards or 20 yards or 25 yards, the center of that scoring zone looks like at that distance, where we might visually not have the good enough vision to be able to see the direct center of the A zone. So do you ever put a mark on that target? Because it is different than our
Yeah.
USPSA. Do you start
Yep.
there?
No, I totally do that. So I'll dot out the A zone, but not necessarily the whole A zone. I'll dot out a specific spot in the A zone that I want to hit. So maybe especially on those IPSC targets, like I mentioned, it's kind of like it almost looks like this. There's a kind of a meaty fat portion on the bottom of that A zone, but it's actually the center of the target. Now the USPSA targets is more of a rectangle, if you will, and the A zone is actually higher in that target, so higher of center. And so if you're shooting USPSA more regularly, those that are listening,
Mm,
and you have that target at 25 yards and you aim in the center of the target, you're already aiming at the bottom of the A zone. Most people are not shooting high. They're going to be shooting low at those distances. So they're already hitting the Charlies and the Deltas. They're not doing themselves any favor by aiming in that specific spot. So that's why it's important to mark out the A zone or mark a specific spot within the A zone that you want to hit. And then I absolutely do that. I'll do like a 2 inch or a 3 inch dot that I'll throw on the target on a specific spot that I want to hit, not just in the A zone, but in different partial targets.
mm,
Because kind of my general rule of thumb when shooting on partial targets is to aim center mass of the available target area
yep.
and maximize the points as much as I can. So yeah, I'll cheat by aiming into the A zone slightly, but I'm more so aiming maybe on the perforated edge or maybe just outside of the A zone, depending on the distance or the difficulty of that shot. So I'll put these little marks on targets, but as the training session goes on and I'm repairing targets throughout that, maybe by the time I shoot 200 or 300 rounds, I don't even see the marks anymore because my tape gun has already taped up all those dots. And then I want to see if I can subconsciously be aiming in those spots. So maybe as you start doing this earlier on in the phases, for those that are listening, maybe you can put those dots up and keep putting dots up throughout the training session for a period of time, maybe for a few sessions, but eventually you want to get to where you see it and you can drive the gun to that specific spot. And after some repair time throughout the training session, by the end of the session, you're no longer needing that crutch, as you mentioned, to aim at those spots. Your subconscious is already saying, hey, when I drive the gun and I see that level of partial target, I'm aiming in this spot or that spot because I've already subconsciously trained myself in a conscious effort to aim in a specific spot because I know and understand I want more room around that potential problem. So that way, if I have a bad shot, I'm not going to shoot the no shoot. I'm not going to shoot the miss. I'm going to maybe give up a Charlie or two because that is the betterment of the overall consistency of my performance that I want to have.
That's super interesting. And folks, if you're listening, if you don't compete, some of this may, to an extent, go over your head, but understand the principles of what you're trying to do. When Max is talking about indexing the targets, one of the things that I found that people do wrong and they fail to do in their training, especially their fundamental phase training, this should probably be the first 6 to 8 weeks of your training year, is teach yourself to index different spots on the target. So, for example, a target and then maybe a hardcover position or a no shoot covering half the target up. So you're going to hold right or left or high or low. And what happens is you can create folks a harder shot by increasing the distance to a target, which may change the way we trigger the gun. We may go into what I call a control pull. Max has a slightly different term, that where we're prepping the trigger. What it doesn't teach you to do is hold a specific area at the unconscious level at speed, and also to shift back and forth from center of the A zone back to an index target. So one of the drills that I don't think you and I did it together, Max, but one thing that I'll do, it's similar to transition hell, but not quite the same, is set an array of targets in the center and have every one of those targets a different index. So, for example, one would be a right hold index, one would be a left hold index, one would be a high index. And you practice firing 2 shots in the center, go to the right target, back to the center, maybe the right target, back to the left open target, back to the center on the left. So you're indexing a different spot every time. and you're having to put that together at speed, which is very interesting. So, folks, write what Max just said down. It's critically important you practice like that. Um, so, and also, Max, what's the volume and frequency that you found works for you? Uh, dry fire, if you're doing much or any, maybe you're doing that in conjunction with your live fire. You're just doing it to warm your shoulders and your arms up, which I think are all important. The older we get is to actually do an actual warm up in
Yep.
shooting training, which almost nobody does. And not like shoot a 5-shot drill like we do in IDPA. That's not actually warming up. Anything, folks, that you're calling a warm up requires enough time and motion of the musculature where you're actually physiologically warming up the muscles and getting blood flow and loosening that tissue up. So, but Max, what's the volume you found in your off season that's appropriate, that makes sense, that you're still learning, and how does that change as we get closer to our goal?
Yeah, I try to touch the gun every day. Um, I can't live fire every day. That doesn't happen. So typically, if I'm in town, if I'm home for the entire week, the plan would be to have 3 days of training, 3 days of live fire. Now, yeah, I mean, some guys might think, well, hey, this guy's a shooting professional. Why doesn't he shoot every single day? I mean, there's just other things that have to be done as a high level professional athlete, whether it's taking care of your body or supporting those that support you. I mean, there's a lot of things that go on through a day that I need to get myself prepared for the next training session. So when I'm at that training session, I can be 100% all there. What I don't want to do is be at a training session answering a phone call or dealing with emails, things of that nature. So when I'm there, I'm 100% there. And that's one of the things that I think that I've learned through my development as a professional level shooter is you do have a lot of time and you can manage your own time, and if you don't manage it correctly, it could be bad. So it's important to build that plan in a way that, yeah, I'm not going to shoot every day. I'm going to have a recovery day, or I'm going to have a recovery week, and that recovery week could be the body, or it could just be doing the invoicing or finding the next class, or following up with the previous student. There's a lot to be done. So I would say in live fire is 3 days a week. Typically, that live fire looks like 2 days of training. Or, I mean, it's 3 days of training, but 2 days of very focused and specific drills, working on certain tasks that I want to get better at. And then that third day is kind of that application phase. And that's typically at the end of the week for me on my Fridays. That's when my dad comes out on a Friday and he helps me kind of move things around and gets the swinger going. And that helps. But the other 2 days are definitely focused more on the uh, I guess the very specific drills, which we can get into in a moment. And then the other days that I'm not training, as I mentioned, I try to touch the gun multiple times a week. So when I'm not shooting live fire, I do try to dry fire. And one of the things that I learned from you is that it doesn't have to be this whole big deal of, hey, go in the shop and dry fire for 3 hours. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be in between workout sets, or it can be in between phone calls. It could be whatever it is. Just get a little bit of reps on the dry fire, just getting my hand to the gun in multiple different ways has been helpful. And now when I'm at the range, as you mentioned, kind of the warm up phase before the session even starts, I do a dry fire phase. And that's my favorite dry fire time, is at the range getting ready to live fire. I feel like I'm almost kind of connecting my brain. I'm switching my brain on essentially. Hey, this is go time. It's time to start. It's fun to laugh and joke and have fun with your buddies, but this is the time to get better. And this is how I'm going to get better. And I go through my dry fire phase for probably 15 to 20 minutes before I actually live fire. And then from the physical standpoint, I think it's very important to also warm up the body. Maybe that's because of where I'm at physically, but it could be just some basic stretching, or maybe rolling out on a foam roller with some basic stretching, and then also get some hip mobility. Get some, just get the hips activated. So there needs to be a warm up phase, an activation phase, and then an active warm up as well. So an active warm up can be some level of movement. It could be shuffles or karaoke's or some of the things that you've done as a kid in football and baseball in these different ways. But I think warming up the body and warming up the brain, in other words, kind of flipping the switch to get ready for the day, is very important. But overall, I would say that's kind of how my training looks. My volume and my intensity is I try to live fire 3 days. I try to dry fire the other days that I'm not live firing. And when I do shoot, I'm all there. I'm 100% connected. And it might only be for 3 or 4 hours, but while I'm there for those 3 or 4 hours, I'm going to shoot 600 to 800 rounds. And I'm going to focus on getting better at whatever skill that I'm trying to get better at.
Great stuff, man. And I won't even tell the audience how many rounds we shot per day when I was there. But I can tell you that we did have some fun, but we also
Mhm.
learned a ton. And so if you're listening to me right now, I want you to focus, especially if you're let's just say you're an intermediate, close to advanced shooter. Couple things that Max said. I want you to write these down. Number one, you should absolutely positively be doing a what he calls an activation phase slash warm up. Whether that's it's a combination of physically moving your body in a manner where your joints and everything are starting to move and warm up and increasing flexibility. There's no downside to that. That activation carries directly over to your training drills because when you're in a match, you're going to be activated. So you want to be practicing in the same state. Also, mentally activating and visually activating, whether that's eye warm ups or eye movement drills or whatever else are critical. I too agree that some of your dry fire stuff should be absolutely done before a live fire session, or maybe even in the session itself, where you do a live fire version of a drill. I used to do this in Still Challenge, and then you do that same run dry fire. Uh, Folks, if you're really serious about training, you're probably going to be doing it in such a deliberate manner that it will almost feel boring like work. I will tell you, there's a difference between shooting some fun drills for speed and trying to work on your splits and actually training to get better. It's a completely different thing. And I want to tell the audience, I want to reflect on my training experience with Max. Of course, we've trained together. And I would tell you that many years ago, I don't really remember those sessions a lot, but I don't remember
Mhm.
them having a ton of value. Now, fast forward to this year where we trained together and shot a couple times. And we did some fundamental, I won't call them warm up drills, but fundamental drills to work on some of the basics initially. Max has a plate rack drill. We also did some stuff on paper. I won't give some of those details because I know some of that is in the Max's membership area. He has a membership area as well as I do, and so not everything's for free, folks. This podcast is about free performance, but some of the things are worth paying for, and I suggest you check that out. But I could tell you that there was a deliberateness in this training we started with. It was a deliberateness that was meant to ingrain skills. Which, if you hear my voice, this is really important because if you ever go to a match or get into a drill when the pressure's turned on and you fail to execute the skill under pressure at speed, that's a reflection of what you practiced. It's easy to do things when there's no pressure. It's really hard to pull those things off and be disciplined to make yourself do what has to happen on the gun when there's pressure. But that ability only comes from perfect, deliberate repetitions. And that's what Max and I did when we started. He ran me through some drills. I ran him through some drills. I think we both felt a little off balance because I was running his things and I didn't know what to expect. So I had to rely on my true ability. And one thing, I also honestly put this out there. When I went to train with Max, this is funny. Maybe this will be one of the shorts I'll put on Instagram. I really expected Max to be able to outrun me and outmove me, but not outshoot me. And that was not the case. Max outshot me in our practice session, and I outshot him on some things. But overall, realistically, he was a better shot. So it just reminded this old horse that I needed to work on shooting better and being a better shot. I can tell you that I've heard Rob Latham say in classes that I co-teach with him, if I could do one thing, I would just be a better shot. And training Max with you, I'll say that full disclosure and all of publicity, you just outshot me on a lot of things, which really motivated me to go home and work on pure shooting skill. And I learned a ton from that. So, folks, just hear that the quality of how you do your sessions should be almost so deliberate it's boring. And Max, if you want to expand on that, please do.
Yeah, so I think, when I first, that's what I loved it. You and I had a plan leading up to that training session. Was like, hey, I'm gonna do some of what I do, and I want to kind of expose you to how I train and what my thought process is. And you did the same with some of your drills. So it was really neat. Like you mentioned, we were kind of off balance a little bit. Like, okay, I don't really know what to expect on this drill, or but what I really love about doing those types of, I wouldn't really call them warm up drills either, but more of like the fundamentals of what it is that we do. Everything had a specific need, and I remember running you through some of my plate rack drills, and it's typically about 120 rounds that I'll do on the plate rack every session. There's just no negotiation. I do it every session. That's just what I do to get my day started, because there's so much value in it, and it takes a little while to get through. But I remember when I was running you through those drills, I was like, man, I hope he doesn't think this is super boring or, super stupid or not relevant. But I mean, it could be as simple as a one shot drill, but on that one shot drill, we're trying to accomplish so many different things. And I remember telling you going through it, hey, this drill is one shot or this drill is two shots, but here are the three or four things that we're focusing on for those shots. And then when we're done shooting the shot, this is what we do next, so we can prepare for the next shot. So we took it in phases: one shot, two shots, three shots, six shots, different directions, different presentations. There's a lot that we can take from that, but that is what sets me up for the training session that day, but also what I lean on as you mentioned, when times get tough at the matches. I'm training a certain way in a very conscious effort. I'm making a conscious effort today to continue to become a subconscious actor when I need it most. So when I'm at the matches, I don't think about exactly what you and I did at the plate rack that day, but I know if I think about it every day and I focus on it every training session, then when I can revert to my training, I can get optimal performance at speed on demand, and that's what's critical for us.
And folks, if you're wonder, I'll describe the drill, and I actually have the notes from our quarterly training plan. Which I'm sorry, podcast listeners, I probably won't share all of this, but I may put a kind of a glimpse of what we did in that session in the show notes to motivate you to get on the website and check out the show notes, and then Max may put it in his area. But the drill he's describing was on the plate rack, 15 or 20 yards. Where'd we start?
Usually 15 yards.
15 yards. It was the one shot version is literally draw, create the pressure on the gun and stabilization necessary to fire a shot, transition to the next plate, prep the trigger, but not fire. Right. So get ready. And when we say to the next plate, not anywhere on the plate, the center of the plate. And another thing I learned from Max, folks, that you could apply in your own training is if we train to be as perfect as possible within reason, if we're training to center on the plate, then under the stress of a match where your physical muscles are changing because of the adrenaline dump, your heart rate is not at 97 beats per minute, it's 127 beats per minute, then an edge aiming shot will likely knock the popper down. But you're going to get to the edge aiming shot. You're going to create the ability to do that on demand by holding center in practice. And please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that Max and I would always hold center. As we push more and more speed against each other, which is one of the other advantages of training with someone at your near skill level, we had to accept less of a sight picture on the plate. But initially, we want to train ourselves to look at a plate and attempt to drive the gun to the center of the plate. Now, what happens is, if you've done the reps, is maybe I'm explaining this wrong, but Max, so you add if you want to, but the brain will just fire the shot. If we're trying to push the speed, neither of us think about when to fire, I don't think, at this point in time. So that was the start, and then we would do two plates, and I know Max has that as some of his fundamental drills in his membership area, but it was an eye opener, and you don't have to have a plate rack to do that, folks. You could do that certainly on a paper target. You could do that on whatever. You could do that on a lot of different things.
Yep. Yeah, it's just having that focus and that ability to say, hey, these are the things that I want to work on. How am I going to get the best result? And it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, like the self-assessment stuff. Like, what can I improve upon? If I need to work on follow through, if I need to work on my draw stroke or my transitions or my eye speed, there's so much that happens in those first 120 rounds of my practice session. And what I do is I load up 6 20-round mags. So I go into it with 120 rounds, and the drill itself is actually like 108 rounds. So I have 12 extra rounds to kind of play with there. And my goal when I go to that is to work on all these things that you and I have worked on during that process, but it's also to get through the entire session with that 120 rounds. And it sounds easy, but there's sometimes I walk back to my table to load my mags again when I left a few plates standing, and it really pisses me off. And I have to think about while I'm loading those mags, okay, why did I take more than 8 extra shots on these particular drills? And then make a note of that. So the next time I go back to that, I can focus even that much more on those areas, those key areas of improvement that'll help me the next time. I would say most of the time I complete that drill with 8 extra shots. I complete it to this point. I've cleaned it a couple of times, but there's most of the time I come off there with 1 or 2 extra shots. But if you're taking more than 8 extra shots on that 108 round drill, you have to really identify, hey, why am I taking these extra shots? What am I doing incorrectly, triggering the gun at speed that is causing me to have this many extras? Because if you have extra shots on that particular drill and that many extra shots and you're not getting through the drill with those 120 rounds, then it identifies to me that there's a problem somewhere that I need to focus on, because it'll present itself at a match, because those are things that we're working on that drill is the draw, it's eye speed, it's transitions, it's follow through, it's visual patience and discipline. It's a lot of things that you're going to need on any course of fire. So you'll see them on those courses of fire, and you'll be shooting deltas and makeup shots as well.
Yeah, and the quality of that training is second to none in terms. And folks, you can apply this in a lot of different areas, and you can also apply it to things that you need to focus on versus what maybe Max and I did in our practice session. And I would tell you, I think there's a lot of value if you have the time in a routine that you're to an extent documenting, that you follow almost every time. And these would be, I call some of my students know the fundamental five, and Max his fundamentals or his unarguables or something to that, whatever you call them. But have a thing in the beginning of your training session. We're talking after your mobility, maybe after a little bit of dry fire, and then maybe enter the theme of training. So the next question I have for you is, I tend to somewhat break my practices down into trigger shooting speed, stabilization. For example, on day 2, I believe you and I worked my box series of drills, and where you can add setups, shooting on the move at a variety of angles, and you can run angles. You can do all kinds of things. So that session would be highly focused on what I call stabilization, and then another session that might be working specifically on positional speed, moving your body to different positions, or entry speed. Do you segment your training sessions like that, or do you work a couple segments in sessions, Max? Or tell me what you do.
Yeah, so I mean, it's very similar. You and I have a very similar path on what we do. I'll have different blocks of training, and I have them in my phone just so if I get to the range and I forget for whatever reason what I'm doing today, I have it in my phone that I can easily access it and say, hey, you're doing this many reps and that many reps. And that could deviate a little bit, but for the primary focus of the training session, it would be very similar to what you have, where it's got like your stabilization work, where it's a movement day, or maybe it's a more of a fundamental day, and then my application day. So I kind of break it down that way, where I'm always going to do exactly what we talked about from the warm-up side of things physically, but then also the plate rack drills kind of get me connected. And then I go to, that happens every day. And then I go to, okay, today is going to be more about the fundamentals of speed shooting, what I call my non-negotiables. And that's going to be stance, grip, draw, posture, reloads, transitions, whatever that might be. And I have a bunch of different drills that I work on for recoil management and transitions. And there's ways that I test my skills within that. So each drill that I do is not just for the sake of doing the drill. It's also then I go into the testing phase of that and say, okay, well, if I can do my 666 drill and I'm less than 7 seconds and I do it on demand and I do it 3 times in a row, and I have pretty good recoil management that can compete against anybody in the world. I can't really get much improvement out of that. I mean, I could work on it a little bit more, but maybe I can't get much more improvement. I can be more consistent in that performance, but that's just going to take time through reps of continuing to do that over and over again. And then I might move on to the next thing. But essentially, it's my fundamentals of speed shooting in the earlier part of the week. So let's say it's a Tuesday, Thursday, Friday training week. Tuesday's my non-negotiables, fundamentals of speed shooting. Thursday would be more of my movement work. That could be a step, what I call a step. I have 3 movements that I use in a course of fire, and I think most people do too. But that's the 3 things that I break down in my head: is my step slide movement, which is a 1 step, my short burst movement, which is 2 to 3 steps, and then my longer lateral movement, which is more than 3 steps.
Mm.
So I'll work those movement drills that I have specifically on that day. And then Friday, as I mentioned, it's putting it all together. It's mini courses of fire. It might not be a 32 round field course. It might be a 12 round or a 14 or a 16 round stage, but it's going to have 2 or 3 positions. And I'll work on kind of everything that I worked on in the earlier part of the week. And I'll put it together in a course of fire. And that'll be very much specific to an event that I have coming up, if possible. If I know, the Area 7 has their stages posted. I'm not going to set up the exact stages, but I might set up arrays from those stages that I might see at the match or that can help me at that match. Maybe it's coming in on a partial target or leaving on a partial target, or low position with a small piece of steel at distance, whatever it might be, maybe shooting on the move. I can add some of that into my stage work. And then of course incorporate the swinger in that regard. So it's very similar to what you do, and I've taken a lot of that training session that you and I have done together and tweaked my own training, because as you mentioned, it does get a little boring. It can get a little monotonous. But look at a football trainer. I mean, look at how the NFL teams, some of the greatest teams on the planet, whether it be collegiately or as at the professional level, they have a time period for everything, and they know exactly what they're going to do. And some of the guys, they don't make it to the next level because they don't like that. They don't like the process of doing the same thing every single day. Even talking to my kids, hey, what did you do in football today? It's the same thing. We do this and we do that and we do this and we do that. That's part of the process of, like, yes, you're going to have to go through those steps every single time. So as one of the things that I learned from you. It was just a different flavor of what I do, which made it fun and remotivating to challenge myself, because you talked about how I maybe shot a little better in that training session, but when we got to the movement stuff, specifically your box drill work, man, I felt like a freaking giraffe trying to run around out there. And I was like, oh God. And I do this for a living, but I feel so bad because it was a different way of getting me to accomplish these different tasks, and it made it new, and it gave me a new challenge, which I was still working on the same thing, but it kept it a little more fresh. But overall, there's a period that you're going to go through, and you got to do the same thing over and over again, and that's just what professional athletes do to be the very best at what they do.
100%, man. I love that. So let's zoom back out to the bird's eye view, because we've talked about the individual sessions and maybe volume and when you might dry fire and how you might approach a session. Um, so bird's eye view. Now we're going through the year. We're doing these 2-3 days a week. Probably 3 days a week would be optimum, but we're hitting matches. So what changes as we're getting closer to our world shoot date in terms of training volume, training focus, and how do the matches along the way affect the training changes?
Yeah. So number one, I'm being very selective on my schedule. I'm looking over my schedule throughout the entire year. As we get closer to the event, I've worked with a lot of different folks, and I've questioned and asked a lot of different folks from different industries, different professional athletes. And as people get closer to an event, many people will do less. And I don't know, maybe that works for some people, but for me, as the event gets closer, I do intensify. I try to be more present. I try to do more. Um, and I think, maybe there's a case for both, where you can say, hey, I want to be fresh. I want to go into there hungry, and which you don't want to be burnt out by no means. I've been there before. I'm sure you've been there before as well. So you have to find that balance of what that looks like. But I'm definitely being very selective with my schedule. What am I adding on? Am I getting a phone call that says, hey, can you come out and film this video because we want to do this new campaign, or do I want to go out and shoot a match? Like, I have to be very selective in that, and I have to find a way to say no sometimes, because every time I say yes to whoever's calling, I'm telling myself and my family no. And that's one thing that I have to look at when I'm building my schedule. But overall, I think it's just very important to create that path of learning, and part of that learning is going to be going out and competing. So to answer your question, when I go out and shoot these matches, again, being very selective of what matches I go to, not just because I want to go there because I'm going to see my buddy that I haven't seen in a while and I like the match director and I like the stages, but go get uncomfortable. Go out to these matches where I don't know the language. I don't know anybody. I don't know anything. They know me. They know that I'm supposed to win or I'm supposed to perform at a certain level. So that increases anxiety. That makes it more difficult for me. That makes it more uncomfortable for me. Again, going to the environments that I'm not comfortable with and don't know the language, don't know the food, don't know how to prepare properly out there the way that I would want to, and sleep patterns are off, and all those things make it very difficult and challenging. Who cares how you perform? Go there, do the very best you can. That's a training. That's part of your training. A lot of people think going to the matches is I have to win. Maybe some people think I'm supposed to win because they're used to seeing that name towards the top. But maybe you're going to these matches as a training event. And you come back from that match or that training event and you say, okay, what did I do well? What can I improve upon? So that way, when I go to the next match where I'm uncomfortable, how can I become more comfortable and be myself and be able to perform at a high level in September, not in July or not in April or whatever the month is when you're at these different locations. So typically, as the match gets closer, I intensify my training and I try to continue to go through my stuff over and over and over again, almost to where I'm getting more and more obsessed. And I know that maybe mentally some people won't connect with, but I try to get even more and more into it and dive into it deeper and harder and make sure I'm not screwing anything up or forgetting anything. And then using each training session and using each match as a training session to make sure that I'm on track and I'm doing things the way that I'm supposed to be doing. So that way I can give my best result in September.
How do you know you're ready? 2 weeks out, 2 weeks before the match, a week out, days before. What are some of the indicators in your mind that you're like, I'm ready? Given there's no injuries, no problems, no issues, I'm ready. I'm about as good as I can be. I'm ready. What creates that feeling?
I think what has always created that feeling for me is knowing that I've outworked everybody else and that I've done everything that I possibly could. And I can honestly look at myself and say, I've done everything I possibly could. That number one makes me feel so much more confident and comfortable going into the event because I know there's nothing else I could have done. It's time to take the test. I've done everything that I possibly could. So, from a mental standpoint, if I don't put in the time or the effort or the energy, I can't lie to myself. I might be able to tell you or whoever that's asking, yeah, I'm ready. I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
But deep down in my head, and you guys know that too, listening, we know if we're lying to ourselves. And if you're lying to yourself, you're not going to perform your best. So that's number one. I have to do those things, and that will help me be better prepared. And then part of it too is along the way, as I mentioned, I'll go through my different drills and it'll identify and tell me, am I moving the gun in recoil for my transition drills? That's one of the things I'm really big on. Am I moving the gun in recoil? In other words, am I not allowing the gun to stabilize on the initial target and then transition? Because if I do that, I'm losing tenths of a second per target per stage, and it adds up big time. So I have a drill that I do that I make sure, hey, is my split and transition ratio less than a tenth of a second on this particular target at this distance? And I'll go, so physically I'll go through these drills and make sure I'm checking those boxes. And if I'm not checking those boxes, then I need to be working on them along the way. So by the time I get to August and I'm doing my last minute preparation for the world shoot, whether it be equipment, physical aspect, maybe, brushing up on a couple of small other techniques that now they posted the stages, or maybe I got a little flavor of what the match would look like. Maybe I'm brushing up on those last few little things, but by that point, I can go back into my training logs and see the things that I've done well. And then I've checked all those boxes of the main skill sets of what we need for action shooting, which stance, grip, and posture is my recoil management. Check. I'm doing my 20 alpha drill and my 666 drill under this par time with this, full raw time or whatever it is. Doing well with that. My draw stroke on my 10-yard target versus my 30-yard target looks like this, whether it be hands up, hands at the sides, or hands on a barricade. Check. Then my reloads from moving from one position to the next, I'm not seeing any difference on the clock if I'm reloading or I'm not. Check. That's, that means I'm loading on time. I'm getting the gun up in position, whether I'm loading or not into that position. Then I have my barricade work, my leaning around an object, and I'm keeping balance and stability because I'm working on different transitional drills around the barricade, whether I'm entering that position, leaving that position. So there's a lot that I would go through physically and see that. So I've always been a big believer in seeing the result, not just telling myself I'm the greatest because I'm trying to lie to myself. Put in the work, put in the time, mentally, so that way I know I'm ready to go. And then from the physical aspect, I can do all those quick little check on learnings throughout. Every month, reassess the training plan the previous month, and then before you set up the next month. And you can even get to it deeper. You can go weekly and daily if you really wanted to, but at a minimum, every month, identify, hey, what worked last month? What do I need to tweak this month to make it better? And then, yeah, then I feel like I'm best prepared for that match physically as well as mentally.
Yeah, great answer, man. I love that as well. That's a fantastic answer. I'm thinking, can't wait to get to my notes and make some more notes. And Max, I know we're almost an hour and 40 into it, so I want to kind of start to bring this home. So the last thing I want to talk about in this train up for the world shoot is pressure. And I also want to tell the listeners that I know the Max Michel that would go to the porta potty and puke the morning of a match, and this is very common. You wouldn't eat to the day of. A lot of people don't know that about you. I think you put out there in the past. This is nothing terribly raw, but maybe raw. And I think a lot of people think that when you get to a certain elite level, you've won 13 national titles or world titles or whatever, that the pressure just doesn't bother you anymore. You don't feel the pressure. You and I both know that doesn't that state never exists. So tell people a little about okay, we're ready. We've done the work. That in itself sets the tone for potential success. We can't ever control the other shooters. If there's someone that shows up that's better than us, we're not going to win. That's just the fact. That's the bottom line. But getting into the match, pressure. How do you feel it? How do you mitigate it? Are there some things beyond knowing that you've done everything in your power to manage that pressure?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that you need to do, and number one is understand everybody might be slightly different, but what's been best for me is to control what I can control. Before the match, we've talked about that at length already, but during the match, it's extremely important as well. Control what you can control. And what I mean by that is you touched on, Mike, is I can't control somebody else's performance. I can only control my performance. So when somebody does well, no big deal. That's what they were. That's what they're there to do. They're also competing for a world championship. They are supposed to do well. Don't let somebody else's, you know, positive performance or somebody else's success be your failure. So for me, it's control what I can control in every aspect. And the very first thing for me that I need to do is reduce the anxiety, because typically when anxiety goes up, performance goes down. And that's usually the way it works. Some people might say, like, oh man, the adrenaline was rushing and I was able to get a performance that I've never done before. Maybe that happens occasionally, but that's not a consistent thing that you're going to repeat on demand every time. More times than not, you'll make a mistake because you're seeing things so fast and you're trying to input information so fast that you're going to make a mistake because you're not ready to absorb that. So my number one thing is to reduce anxiety. And the way that I reduce that anxiety is by being early on everything that I do. So if my start time is at essentially creating a routine, right? And everybody has their own routine, but have a routine that's going to make you comfortable and reduce anxiety. And a big part of my routine is being early. I remember there was a TV show many years ago that I was a part of called Hot Shots. And I remember on that TV show going, and I watch it every now and then. I was just watching an old show a couple of days ago on YouTube, which I love being able to see that and going back and seeing, my kind of rehungers me too. But, one of those shows that I was watching, I heard myself say on camera, because you couldn't see me, it was so dark. It said, I actually said, hey, I'm going to dry fire until the sun comes up, and then I'm going to do it. Then I'm going to do some warm up shots after that. That was before competing for a national championship that day. It's something that, I still work with, is I want to be early because it can reduce the anxiety. So if your start time is at 8 a.m., some guys roll up to the range at 7:45, throw their gear on, and they're going shoot. You're not going to get your best performance that way. You're rushing to load your mags, you're rushing to put your gear on, and you still got to tell people hello. So I try to get to the range a minimum of 1 hour early. An hour and a half would be best. If I can get there an hour and a half early, that gives me plenty of time to bump into Mike Seeklander and say, oh,
Yep.
dude, how's it going? How's everything been? And not feel like I'm in the back of my mind, like, oh my God, I got to load my mags and I got to put my gear on. I got to dry fire. I got to do my warm up routine. I want to basically lay out a routine. So I would say how you manage pressure or stress from a physical aspect is create some sort of a routine. That's worked really well for me. And typically getting there early so I can go through my entire routine and get to my stage well before all my other competitors has always put me in a better state of mind to where I can take that deep breath and I can focus on the things that I want to focus on instead of swimming upstream. Instead of reacting, I'm essentially, being proactive in what I'm doing for the day.
I think that's super important, man. And I used to shoot with a top shooter. I won't mention his name. That would be late and last minute leave the motel. And finally, I'm like, now I'll get my own car, man. I just I want to get there and do my thing and have lots of time. And the listeners of this show also learn from the fact that Max May on the Hot Shots show said, "I'm going to dry fire till the sun comes up." Like you've got a dry fire area. If you're not going to a match and doing 25, 50, 100 draws, maybe some empty mag loads, or careful your ammo, or some transitions on the spots on the wall in the safe area, I would ask you why not. Because if you're in a match and you're really truly trying to, even at a club match, you're trying to kind of act like the professional that you are. Think about any professional sport, or even think about you know eighth grade basketball. Guess what they do before they start the game? They go warm up. They go practice free throws and they practice layups, and they're doing dribble and war. So why would we not do that? And that always drives me insane about myself as well. I've been to matches and just like, I'm comfy. I'm going to walk up and just draw and totally miss my draw and just didn't feel great. And I'm like, man, could have been looser. I could have been warmer. I mean, I could sit here and do arm circles, but guess what, folks? There's a dry fire area you can go do draws in. Why would you not do the same movement and draw you're about to do on the stage? I love that. Getting early, being prepped, having a routine, following that routine. The human brain favors routine, folks. So if you are not in a routine, you're already setting yourself up for success. And another part of that routine is going to major matches and seeing the other top shooters in their jersey or seeing your peers. That's one thing I noticed for many years. I did not shoot many major matches, and that's been my downfall. I traveled a lot. I did other things. I just did not prioritize major matches. And then I'd show up to the nationals and I'd see all my peers and Max Michel and Travis Tomasi and Rob Latham in their jerseys. So my brain automatically equated that environment to high stress, high pressure national championship instead of just seeing Max the last 8 area championships I shot with him. It's like, hey man, just saw you at the last match. Yeah, this is the nationals now, but it creates an environment where your brain doesn't key on those stimulus and get all nervous, and you're still going to feel those nerves. And I think that's a good point too, Max. Is like the nerves don't go away. We're just so confident in our skills and have a good habit and routine, so we minimize the effect of that anxiety or the nerves we're feeling. So, anything
Yeah.
else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just have a routine before you even go there. Have a plan in place. So, part of my kind of my match preparation and excuse me, and my match performance, they work very well together. Leading up to the match, there's several things that I'll do, but part of that is understanding, what hotel I'm going to stay at, what airport I'm going to fly into, what route I'm going to take from the hotel to the range, what time does the match start versus what time does the gate open, when can I register, can I go a day early and look at stages. I mean, there's so many things that you can do to reduce anxiety, but once you create that plan and you make it a consistent plan and you do it at a club match and you do it at a major match and you do it at a nationals and a world shoot, it all becomes very much the same, as you mentioned, and it kind of the brain can pick up on that and give you better performance because you're not thinking like, oh my God, this is the one shot, this is this big thing, it needs to always be a very much routine. And then on top of that, during the competition, you might hear me talk about, throughout the day, hey, I'm just sticking to the plan because I've already created a plan even for the match, like whether it be, hey, I'm going to attack this stage or that stage a certain way. And just because Mike crushes this stage, I'm not going to change, what I do because I know what I'm capable of and what my strengths and my weaknesses are. I'm going to stick to my plan. But having a routine that you can go back to every single course of fire, what you do before you get into that box and say you're ready to go versus, what you do afterwards and what you do in between. I mean, everything truly matters, and you should be able to have fun during this experience as well, and that'll help reduce that anxiety. But the goal overall is, like you said, you're never going to stop the nerves. You're never going to say like, oh man, I'm not nervous at all. That's not going to happen. Maybe it does for somebody out there that's listening, but if that happens to you, then it's probably because you maybe don't care as much. Maybe you're
Yeah.
just there to have fun with your buddies, But if you're truly wanting to get a good performance out of what you're doing out there, you're going to feel that nervousness. You're going to feel that anxiety. Some of the baddest people in the world that I train with, when they hear that buzzer go off, it's like, they turn into something completely different, and they kind of forget their plan and forget what they do. And it's just because they just not used to that part of the competitive mindset. So it's just, retraining the brain and creating a consistent performance that you can go back to. And what I mentioned too, creating a routine. I love having a routine in the box as well, because that's when you're going to feel the greatest anxiety, is not just throughout the day, but when you're getting in there and they say load and make ready. What you do during that 20 to 30-second period could be very, very vital to your performance on the stage. And everybody's going to be different for that. My routine will be different from your routine, Mike, or somebody else's routine. But having a routine, it almost puts you into a mindset that, yeah, I can't control this. I can't stop, the anxiety, but if I go through these steps, then I'm going to comfort myself in a way that it's at least going to allow me to use that nervousness in a different way, channel it in a different way. And I know we're getting long on this, but I'll just quickly leave another example. I worked with an NFL kicker, what I consider the greatest kicker ever to live, won several Super Bowls. And I asked him, I was in a private room with him one day, and I asked him, I said, how the hell do you get in front of 100,000 people on a football field? Millions of people are watching, and it's on your foot to kick that championship. It's on your foot to win. Now, this guy might get called upon 2 times in the entire game, but those 2 times are probably the most important times of the game. And he told me that, yeah, he feels a nervousness. There's no way of getting around that, but he uses it to elevate his level of focus on the things that he's supposed to be doing at that moment, which I thought was super cool, because yeah, now something matters to you. So now you can use that as a hyper focus to create a routine, do everything correctly the way that you want to do it and accomplish it. So that way you can get the result that you want. If you think about, oh my God, I got to make the kick, you're not making the kick. If you think about 10 things that you want to do step by step, and you visualize it and do them correctly over and over and over again with a routine, well, you're just doing another kick that you've done a million times in a row when nobody was watching. And I think that was the difference between the elite level guys versus, the guys that aren't at that highest level. You use that nervousness, if you will, or anxiety, if you will, to not fight it. Because if you fight it, it's not going away anyway. But use it and say, I'm going to go through this routine to give me the best level of hyper focus to get the result that I want.
I love it, man, because routine, your preload routine is actually one of the longer ones on the circuit. I've always watched you going, what's he doing? Why is he taking so long? How does he stand up there and do that? I just want to get up and load and make ready and make it done. So my routine is different than yours, but I've also lengthened mine and decided to get up there in the box and go, I'm here. I'm nervous. I might as well take a couple side pictures, run the plan in my mind, load, press check, whatever, but yours is very deliberate. It's very fun to watch. Actually, it's very long. It almost makes me nervous sometimes. I'm like, come on, just shoot the gun, But it's really funny actually when you think about that. So I love it, man. Nerves elevate your level of focus. That's a great way to put that. And hey, when the timer goes off, just shoot the gun, grip the gun, let the aiming dictate the pace. You are where you are. Your training created you at that moment in time. You cannot change anything at that point in time. If you fail, then that's just a representation of your mental or physical abilities then. And guess what? It's not the end of the world. Your family's still going to love you and whatever else, folks. So just take the pressure off. Just when the go button says go, just go. Let the aiming dictate the pace. So this is an excellent up to a potential world champion, not a potential, a world championship this coming year. So if you have anything else to add, please add. But Max, tell us what Max Michel has going on in his life right now with your company, 6 Hour. Anything personal you want to talk about, and then we'll start to wrap the sucker up.
Yeah, I think just real quickly to kind of finish what you were saying there. I love, you are who you are. I've heard that before. You are who you are when the buzzer goes off. So, and if you win, awesome. You're going to go back to practice the next day. If you lose, great. You're going back to practice the next day anyway as well. And that's another Kobe Bryant type of thing. So I think that's you know, you don't need to make anything bigger than what it really is, because at the end of the day, you're going to go back to work the next day anyway and try it again all over. Because if you win today or lose today, it doesn't matter tomorrow. You got to get back on the horse and get back to work. So I wanted to definitely finish with that as well. But yeah, so kind of, what I have going on, what SIG has going on, we have a lot of stuff that we're working on. Excited about a new gun and a new platform, coming out next year, later in the year. But before that, we're launching a new program in January. We're going to be calling it the SIG Off Duty Program, and that's going to be geared and aimed toward military, veterans, law enforcement, first responders, people that I'm very near and dear to. That kind of how I continue to serve my country, is by serving those who support us and protect us. In many different ways, and I do that through a bunch of different platforms. But I'm very excited to be the kind of the face and the guy that's spearheading that program for SIG. So I'm really looking forward to doing more in the law enforcement community and with our veterans and first responders throughout the year. Next year, we'll be doing a lot with that. That'll be kind of like a special discount, special offer program specifically to those folks who do so much for our country. And then part of that is I've developed a couple of guns, which we're calling the 320 mod, the Max Off Duty. So we'll have a couple of different platforms now that not just competitive shooting guns, but also guns that take the performance side of shooting with the duty side of what folks need in that world. And we'll be bringing them the best of that what we can offer. So I'm excited about that program. So I'm doing more with SIG in the business side and the product development side, which has been a lot of fun and very rewarding. All while I'm still trying to win personal goals and do personal things as well. So it's keeping me very busy. And I'm just looking forward to continue to do what I've always done, whether that be the pro shooter experience, where I bring, a platform to so many different people, the VIP experience that, people have fun and enjoy and love, or my training classes. Been working with Steve Tarani, the knife expert, who is extremely incredible at what he does. So just trying to be more well-rounded as an instructor and help give back to other people in different ways. But yeah, at SIG in particular, we have an awful lot going on. I can sit here and talk for another hour if we wanted to, but if you guys haven't checked out the SIG Experience Center in Epping, New Hampshire, I would definitely go check it out. We have the Sig Sauer Academy in New Hampshire, as well as the Academy Outpost, which is down in Volusia County, Florida. But the one up in New Hampshire, we have classes going on every day, 7 days a week, multiple classes a day. And the actual experience center is very unique. If you don't know anybody and you can't get a private tour of Sig Sauer, that is the way to experience SIG. You get into this experience center. There's a huge flagship store, which is unbelievable with the staff that we have there. We have a museum, so you can kind of see how SIG started and where it is today, which is really neat. There's a lot of really cool guns in there. You might find one of my guns in the museum and a cool little story behind that gun. And then we have multiple indoor shooting ranges there as well. And it's just a way to experience and connect with SIG, and maybe the way that you haven't done so before. So a lot going on, a lot of competitions there as well. We have a new SIG competition division where we have so many different competitions at the academy as well. So lots going on.
Sweet, man. And Max, a couple rapid fire questions. What's your favorite dessert?
Oh man, I love it. Geez, favorite dessert. I'd have to say ice cream. I feel like I'm always going for the ice cream, some sort of chocolate and chocolate peanut butter ice cream.
I love it. What's your favorite food?
Italian food.
Italian food. Italian. That's awesome, man. Man, I am super excited to come train with you. I know you sent me a match calendar recently, so I will get with those dates. Tell people where they can find you, find more about you, and as well as your membership area and your training classes.
Yeah, the easiest way to find me and more about me would be maxmichel.com, maxmichel.com, or you can find me on Instagram at maxjmichel. Those are probably the easiest ways to find me and see information about my classes, upcoming events, or if anything you specifically have a question on, or if you want to train with me, or go through one of my courses or bring me into your department type of a deal. And then lastly, my Patreon account, which is patreon.com/train with Max, where I have nearly 500 training videos and hours upon hours of information up there.
Excellent, man. Well, I loved it. This is a great, whatever this was, show number 4. Of course, we'll talk about the previous shows in the show notes. So check out the show notes, folks, on the AmericanWarriorshow.com. Give Max a follow if you haven't already. You're foolish if you haven't checked out his website and specifically his Patreon account. Definitely check him out there. I know we're going to bring Max on to Live Fire and have him on live fires or more of a presence sometime in the future. And if you ever get a chance to shoot with him, please do so. I know I can't wait to come down and train with you again, Max. Excellent job. I sure appreciate you coming on. I know it was kind of a long one, 2 hours, but I think it was worth every second. Any closing comments or thoughts before we end this bad boy?
Well, I just want to say thank you for letting me come on here and be a part of it. I always enjoy talking with you. I learned so much from training with you and just speaking with you. So I'm going to challenge you to make me better next year.
Yeah.
I definitely want and need that because I need some guidance in that way and motivation and just stay on track. I don't care who you are, what level you are. It's great to have some mentor that you can surround yourself with that will make you better. And I think you and I have done that for one another throughout the years. And then lastly, I'll just leave everybody with, always remain humble and do the things that you can control, what you can control. And what I mean by remain humble is always act as if someone is bigger, better, faster, and stronger than you. And then a couple things happen from that. You never get outworked. You will always be competitive, but more importantly, you'll always be the type of person that people want to associate with. And I think that gets overlooked a lot these days. Many of us, we wear a jersey and we want to get the recognition, we want to get the wins, we want to get sponsorship, but we don't see the work and the energy that it takes to get to that certain level. So don't rush it. You are who you are at this moment, but take that and continue to work harder and challenge yourselves or get other people to help challenge you to be better. So that way you can get to where you want to be the right way, not just by Instagram or whatever other form or platform that's out there. So do the right thing, work hard, control what you can control, and good things happen.
You heard it, folks, from Max Michel, multiple time national and world champion. Always remain humble, and you will not get outworked. Great closing statement, folks. Listen to this one twice because there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of detail on this one. So rewind after you get to this point, listen to it again. And until then, train hard.